Welcome back everyone, and this is the last video to our Portscanner project. Right now what we're going to do is we're going to first of all recap what we did inside of this program. So we're just going to go through the program code real fast and explain what everything is doing once again. And then I will show you how you can use this program and import it inside of another program so you can use it. Alright, so first of all, let's navigate all the way down to the beginning of the program. Here, as you can see, we prompt the user to input a target or multiple targets. We then check whether they specified one target or multiple targets. If we find comma inside of this variable, that means they specified multiple targets. Therefore, we will split all of those targets, and for each and every IP address inside of this variable, we will perform the scanning of that IP address. In any other case, that means if we didn't find comma, that means they only specified one target. Therefore, we're going to perform the scan function onto the targets variable, as it is only storing one IP address or one domain name. Okay? Then once we navigate to the scan function, here we first take the converted IP variable and then we perform the check IP function onto the specified target. If the specified target is simply IP address, we will return that IP address and it will be stored inside of the converted IP. In case the target is an actual domain name, therefore we're going to perform this socket getHostByName method, which allows us to convert the domain name into an IP address. Okay? Right after we convert the IP address, we scan for 100 ports. Now this number, keep in mind, can be changed. For example, you can scan for first 500 ports if you'd like. It doesn't have to be 100. This is a number that you can change. Now another thing that you might want to implement in this program if you want, is you can also prompt the user for how many ports they want to scan. How we would do that? Well, we will simply do that by specifying something like this. You go to the beginning of the program and there you can simply type port num. Let's say we call the variable like that, and then input, enter number of ports that you want to scan. Then the user would enter the number of ports. Oops, let's not leave this to be capital. Let's leave it like this. So enter number of ports that you want to scan. Then you would take this actual variable and you will also paste it into the scan function. Once you do that, if you go back to the scan function, right here, you would simply have something like port num as a parameter, and then you would have for port in range 1 through port num. So you wouldn't have 500, you would have something like port num. So simple as that. But we're not going to leave it like this. Let's just leave it as the way it was before. This is just something that you can implement and leave it in the program if you want. In this case, we are not going to use that since it is not necessary. We simply just always want to scan for first 500 ports. So I will delete this. Also keep in mind, if you leave that option, you also need to specify the port number inside of this line right here and also inside of this line right here as a second parameter to the function. Okay? So once we get to this for loop, we scan for each and every port between the range of 1 and 500, and we do that by using the scan port function. So let's go to the scan port function, and this is the main part of the program. Here we create a socket object, we set the timeout so we don't actually waste too much of our time trying to figure out whether a port is closed or open. Keep in mind that the accuracy of the scan will depend on the amount of the timeout that you set. The lower the timeout, the lesser the accuracy, the higher the timeout, the bigger the accuracy. Okay, so then we perform the connect function onto the target IP address and the port number. Right after it, if we manage to connect, we will simply just try to get banner and figure out which software is the target running on that specific open port. If we don't manage to get the banner, we will simply just print open port without the banner, and if we do manage to get it, we will print open port, then the port number, and we will attach the banner right after the two dots. Okay? In any other case, if we don't manage to connect, we will simply just pass and not print anything because we are not really interested in printing which ports are closed. We're only interested in printing the open ports. Okay, so this is basically the whole idea of this Portscanner project. And now let's see how we can actually use this program and import it into another program. Okay, so how can we do that? Well, first of all, what we need to do is we need to create another file. So I'm just going to go right click on the Portscanner, then go to the new and then Python file, and let's call this file ipscan.py. It will automatically add it right here, so you will have two tabs, one for the Portscanner and one for the ipscan, and now we want to import this program. Now, one thing before you actually do that is you need to make sure that both of these files are in the same directory. In my case, they are both in the Portscanner project, therefore they are in the same directory, so I can proceed. Now, the next thing that we need to take a look at is the name of our Portscanner, so it is named portscanner.py. Now, in order to actually import this file into another file in the same directory, we simply just type the command import and then the name of the program that we want to import. In our case, it is Portscanner. So let's type it right here, Portscanner, and you will see that PyCharm already recognizes it. Therefore, we successfully managed to import our Portscanner program. Now, how can we perform the same task that we did right here, just without typing all of this code? Well, we can simply just call these functions from our second program and use them independently. Okay, so the use of this importing is basically if anyone else wants to use our Portscanner, they can simply just import it and use the functions from that program into their own program. So what we're going to specify right here first is the IP address to, for example, be testphp.oneweb.com. This is the domain name that we used to test with our Portscanner before, so nothing new right here. And all we need to do to actually run this Portscanner inside of a different program is to call the scan function. Now, at first you might be asking, well, why are we calling the scan function? Well, basically you will notice that by calling this scan function, all of the other functions get called as well. For example, inside of the scan function, we first call the check IP function in order to check for the IP address. Then we call the scan port function, which will scan each and every port that we specify inside of this for loop. And inside of the scan port function, the get banner function gets called in order to print the banner. So we don't need to call specifically all of these functions, we can simply just call the scan function. Okay, so how can we do that? Well, in order to call a function from a different program, we first of all need to specify the program name. Just the same way that you would specify a method from a different library. For example, right here, we used socket library and we called a method or a function, and we called a function from that specific library, but before we had to specify the library name. Same way goes here, we first need to specify Portscanner and then dot and then scan. You remember that the scan function takes one argument, which will be the target, as the PyCharm already tells us right here, and our target will be the IP address. And believe it or not, but this is the entire program. Just by using these 3 lines, we can perform the same thing that we did inside of our Portscanner project. So this is the power of importing libraries. You can see that anyone who wants to use this can simply just write 3 lines and they will perform the same task that we performed by coding the entire Portscanner. But there is another thing that we need to take a look at before we actually try to run the IP scan. You might notice this part right here. Well, we don't really want to run this since, first of all, we're calling this scan function already inside of our IP scan program, therefore we don't really want to call it twice. And we would actually call it because by importing the Portscanner into our IP scan, we're also calling this part of the code. Importing a library simply means that we're going to paste the entire Portscanner code into our IP scan function. Therefore, this part of the code will also get ran. So how can we make sure that this part of the code doesn't get ran? Well, simply we can type if __name __ equals and then open double quotes __ main __. If this is equal to main, then we're going to run this part of code. So let's tab all of these lines in, so they belong to this if statement. And now this part of the program will only get ran if we run the Portscanner. This line basically means that the actual Python will recognize whether this program is being ran as a main program or it is being imported into a different program and ran from there. In case it is being imported in a different program, like in this case right here, then it will not run this part of the code. If it is not imported into a different program, and if we simply just try to run the Portscanner itself, then this part of the code will actually run. And that is the meaning of this line right here. You can simply just remember this as, if this is the main program, then run this part of the code. Okay, so right now let's test our ipscan.py. Let's open the terminal and let's type python 3 ipscan.py. You can see it is scanning the target. It already found the 2 ports open, and it will scan for first 500 ports as we specified and change the number from 100 to 500. You can see we are also getting some banners from these open ports. We got open port 106, open port 110, 143. We can see here is a long banner from that port. Not really sure what this is. We also discover another open port, which is port 465, and therefore our program closes as it reached the 500 ports number. Okay, so it actually does work. Now another thing that you should keep in mind is that you will need to actually code this part of the code into this ipscan, because, for example, if a user specifies comma and then an IP address, this will not work because we do not have this part and this if statement right here. Therefore, it will not be able to scan because of this comma right here. So if you want to be able to scan multiple targets from your ipscan program, make sure that you implement this if statement into the ipscan. But we're not going to do that at the moment. There is no need for that. We already did that in the Portscanner program, and I will leave that up to you. Okay, so with this, we actually finish our first project, which will be the Portscanner. And in the next project, we're going to take a look at how we can create the vulnerability scanner, which will be based on this Portscanner that we just created. So make sure not to delete this program, as we're going to need it. You also know that you will have all of these actual programs in the resources at the end of each project. Okay, so you can simply just download them if you don't want to code them. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and I will see you in the vulnerability scanner project. Take care and bye.